we can now prove what we kind of have always known. When you eat food that comes from a certain system that is healthy, when the system is healthy, then the human system is healthy. But you can see that that's a layer beneath what actually lives on the panel of a food in the supermarket, right? That is beyond country of origin. That is beyond nutrient panel. That is beyond ingredients list. And so you kind of can't really understand it till you see how fat and happy the cows are, right? How do you prove how fat and happy my cows are?
Hello and welcome to the Regenerative Design Podcast. I'm your host, Mathieu Mehuis, and in this show, I interview the leading authorities in the world of regenerative practices, people who do good and do well. Are you a person that cares about your environment and our planet, that wants to leave the planet to our children to be something that we can be truly proud of, to enjoy for many generations to come? But are you also a person that believes we can do all of this and do good in business? I have really good news for you. You're here listening to the podcast that is all about making our planet a better place and making your business more successful. Enjoy the show. Welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Design Podcast with your host, Mathieu. And today we have another great guest. Her name is Melissa Baer. And Melissa is a serial entrepreneur. She is also an athlete. She has played rugby, soccer, a professional athlete, and she's now she's also a she's a farmer too, and she also has several businesses, and she's now focusing also with her business on how to bridge the gap between technology, marketing, and branding for regenerative projects around the world. So that's really exciting. So Melissa, I'm very excited to have you on the show. Welcome. How are you
Thank
doing
you.
today?
I'm good. I'm excited to speak to you.
Nice.
I'm looking forward to
Yeah,
digging into it.
exactly. Yeah, we already talked offline. We should have almost recorded everything, but yeah, let's share it with our listeners. Like,
Okay.
give me your backstory. Like, where did
Yeah.
all of this start?
Mm,
And then we'll go deeper from there.
of course. Thank you for having me. And any opportunity to talk about this stuff, it's sort of I describe it as something that it chose me as opposed to me choosing this sort of passion, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I grew up in a family. My dad was a visionary, and my godfather, so one of his really good friends, was a naturopath. So my dad decided to convert the farm to organic in 1986,
Wow.
out of this kind of emerging awareness that we can't keep doing what we were doing. And he started having, I was born at that time, and you start to become aware of the impact that you're having on with what you're sort of doing in your day-to-day life.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously became very aware, especially with his friend being in the health field, and that connection between soil, animal, and human health, right? And
Nice.
so I guess I really had no chance. I was
Hmm.
always going to be brought up in this sort of like forward thinking, ahead of its time, kind of way.
Yeah.
So I I describe it to give you kind of a sense. I describe my upbringing. I had like on the wall the wheel of nutrients, and you could track if a lack of calcium in the soil, what would that mean for human health if that
Mm.
came through the supply chain, and where does that end up, and what sort of illnesses or ailments does that contribute to? And so the kind
Wow.
of soil food web is in my DNA a little bit, and it's quite a funny experience because now in life I have it sort of in my bones, right? I forget that I know stuff, but I operate in the world like that's the truth, right? And so
Oh yeah, it's the
that's
norm
the
for you.
yeah, that's right. So that's my blueprint, if you will.
That's very cool.
And then moving forward, um, if my dad kind of went rogue and became organic in 1986, I started to realize that the world was really not set up for people like my dad, and it was not set up to really serve. And we were starting, if you think of that globalization period of time, and you can start to see there's a major disconnect. You start to see that at that point, one generation had never actually set foot on a farm. Prior to that, there was people who were, at least you had grandparents who had a farm,
Mm.
but we
Mm-hmm.
were starting to see people less and less connected to where their food comes from. and the negative consequence that happens when you don't consider yourself part of the food system or you don't consider yourself part of nature, how choices change, how awareness change. And what I also observed is in that same period, so you have your globalization happening, and then you also have the way that you farm food changing. So not
Mm.
only is the way that we're farming food changing, the it's happening all over the world. So now someone's in a retail shop faced with buying coffee from, um, you know, Indonesia or South America, meat from New Zealand, milk from Canada, and the context is gone, right? So this is
Mm.
like a completely different way to the way the human had made decisions about food or connected and
Yeah.
fueled themselves before, right? It was much more of a, I walk around the place I buy, I get food from, and I nourish my
Mm.
body from the place that I walk around.
Yeah.
So the disconnect really ended up. You can see it now, right? We have, and this was sort of prophetized by my dad and the people that I grew up with, that this would end up being that we would have illness, we would have, chronic disease because the way the global food system is set up, it's not really set up to help you connect and to help you understand the context and to actually help you make good decisions, right?
Hmm.
Um, so now we have what we have, which is poor farming systems that are set up to optimize for a volume based, opaque value chain and ill health from humans, right? And so how do you actually break that down and have it return to more of a system that reflects all the good types of characteristics that we used to have before we
Hmm.
lengthened the supply chain and before we created a lot of distance? So
Yeah.
that was my next step as I set up a business going, hey, how do I do this? How do I set up a business where in the business world it makes financial sense to do the right thing?
Mm.
And so that was my foray into my first company where at 17, where I started selling grass-fed organic beef, from
Wow.
my dad's farm and then from many other farms to consumer. And that was still ahead of its time because there was really no, like, consumer demand, right? And so
No.
my life is kind of themed by the fact that I have become an accidental expert in, how do you actually take what's the right thing for the planet to do, and then how do you actually market that to the
Yes.
and how do you create awareness and get the early adopters and then bring them down the funnel, so to speak, into actually becoming champions. So
Mm.
that was a kind of a PhD in how to do it the hard way. And,
That's
um
amazing because it's like a really really essential part in the whole
mm,
food chain of regenerative farming and probably other regenerative businesses. Like, okay, you got a good idea and you got an
mm,
amazing product,
mhm.
but the whole system is disconnected. People don't know what good food is. They're not aware of it.
Nope.
How do we make people understand if they buy like a steak that is double the price, it's actually going to reduce their
Yeah.
mental fog and
Yes.
healthcare bill, and
Yeah.
it'll make them actually
Mhm.
probably make them more wealthy because they'll have better focus. And like, how do
Yeah.
you
How do
get
you do
people
that?
to
Yep.
understand that? Yeah, that's
And
very interesting.
because there was really no, like, problem, if you will, with the if you talk to anyone in my local city where I, was selling into, there
Yeah.
wasn't a breakdown, there was no problem to solve, right? And so there was no demand as such. But what I found was the early adopters, so the people who had gotten to the point in their life where, their health was so, at risk that the medical model didn't have any options, they had to turn to food, and ended up with this massive audience of people who were just fed up with, the options that they had, and in a weird way that, you would have the experience of such an acknowledging, when people who are, on their in their Crohn's and colitis and cancer and all the like ailments that you wouldn't believe, and they come in tears to you and shake your hand and give you a hug and say, "Your meat is the only meat that we can eat." It's like, just kind of stops you in your tracks and brings you to tears, right? And you go, "Oh, that's why we do it," right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
just even that connection, that energy exchange doesn't get to happen in the value chain, right? And so you can see that farmers are in the global food system, and I experience it here in New Zealand so kind of poignantly, is they don't really see where their role is, right? As soon as it leaves the farm gate, there's no feedback mechanism. There's no one
Mm.
acknowledging them for what's good and what's not good about what they're doing, right? And so the loneliness, the disconnect, the meaning, is all really gone, right? And we I don't know if it's I suspect maybe true everywhere else in the world, but the kind of suicide rates of farmers are quite high, and like we can't keep that is a sign of an unhealthy system, right?
Oh
So
yeah, totally.
it
Yeah,
is,
no, I fully
and
agree.
people and there's sort of like consumers kind of go, well, that's not my business. Well, it kind of is your business if you want to eat, right? And so you concern yourself with that? Well, possibly someone has to, because that is the you can eat you can then maybe we end up in a world where you have all your food and it's made by robots. I don't wanna live in that world.
No, yeah, same.
So,
No,
yeah. Mm.
that's very interesting. Already see, like, I have to put you in a room with a few people that I met in
Oh,
Canada
that'd be amazing.
actually someone I interviewed very early on the podcast. He's also from Ontario, close to Toronto, and he has crazy systems of revitalizing water and creating
Mm,
microbiology. And he has
cool.
people came coming to his farm with stage 4 cancer, and he's like,
Mhm.
okay, I'll put you on a diet of my food and you'll see
Yeah.
things will
Yep.
get better. Sometimes the damage is already too much, but at least you can stretch some
Mm.
people before they pass away. So he's been working with a lot of
Oh,
that, and it sounds
amazing.
like you're doing
Mm.
that too, or you did that in Waterloo or in Canada. And so I also find it very interesting. Canada is kind of an interesting case too, because for some reason they allowed the GMO. Like it's such a rich culture, and they I think you really
Yeah.
value food, but then
Yeah.
they passed the GMO bill, and now in Canada you can take any plant and change it um, genetically, whatever you want to do. You don't
Ooh,
have to do
yeah.
certification. You don't have to do anything. And then if a farmer wants to be organic, he's just like, I'm not going to do all the bad stuff. I'm not going to use GMOs. Then he has to get certified and do all the
Oh, I know.
paperwork. Like, what
And
a world
and
are we living in?
what world is what that we're living in? So that's sort of the coal face that I kind of grew up in, right? And so I mean, I can remember screaming matches of being at farmers meetings with my dad, and you'd have the Monsanto people who are the farmers who were like, "No, you have to do it this way," and then my dad being like, so it was very tense, and that's I was a child, right? So it's just more imprinted as a moment of like, oh,
What happened?
this is not
Yeah.
good, right? And so I agree with you. I don't know what the wisdom or lack thereof caused the genetic modification to be accepted. I kind of my own paradigm or my own principles are that I think when you start to agriculture specifically is one of those domains that if you tweak anything, you actually create a much more kind of ripple effect than can be known in any laboratory research facility.
Hmm.
Anything you cannot understand, even compounding toxicity, right? So, okay, glyphosate in this dosage is fine, but when you're eating food in every day from every place and now you've got this compounding toxicity that can't not affect your lymph, there's just no way. And
Hmm.
so, how do we understand that when we the laboratory doesn't have that ability to understand what that sort of made little micro change is in the big bad world? And so I implore people to take a precautionary approach when you're dealing with hyper novel concepts, um, in the food systems, especially because it's one of the only areas that touches every aspect of the human and natural planet lived experience. And so when
Hmm.
we're messing with that, we are taking Pandora's box and ripping it open, and there's no way you put it back, right?
Yeah,
So
I agree. And I
y-
think even
yeah.
like the GMO per se is not really the problem. Like plants, you can modify them. They
Hmm.
will always return to their original form, I think, but it's just the amount of chemicals that now can be used while
Yeah.
these plants kind of survive. Because even the GMO plants, if you spray chemicals on them, they survive, but they're like super
Just.
unhealthy. So they yeah, like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
making it.
Yeah, do
Um,
you wanna, eat food that is just surviving? Like
yeah.
but this is again example when you can kind of, I guess, empathize with the end consumer who doesn't really understand this, and so they're getting kind of like bombarded with conceptual, if they're even aware,
Mm.
getting bombarded with conceptual um, academic papers, and 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 everything's confusing. Like, is it this or is it that? And
Yeah.
what do I believe? And how? And
Mm.
there's these people are credible, and these people are credible, but it's conflicting. So how do I make a decision, right? And so if you don't have like a seen it yourself, then you're very at the whim of kind of the latest, greatest version of the truth, right?
This podcast is brought to you by the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass. Are you struggling with finding the right tools and tricks for your garden? Are you lacking the confidence to be a self-sufficient gardener? Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by the lack of knowledge and time you have to actually do gardening? Then the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass is for you. Yeah, yeah, but it is changing. I think there's some good
Mm,
movements in
yes.
actually coming. It will probably come from the US too. They just released their like nutritional
Yes.
advisory, and it just turned around the pyramid
They
pretty
literally just
much,
flipped
which
it
is maybe a
around.
little extreme too. It's like, oh yeah, that was before, now do it the complete opposite.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're doing some really good stuff to make it seems like changes that will go through the whole value chain.
Yeah.
So that's
Well,
exciting
I
to
wonder
see.
too, like, just to be a bit of the devil's advocate,
Oh yeah,
um, is that the way forward? Do we just go and change it? Because I think we're not that's a Band-Aid, right? Okay,
yeah,
so for most people, that will probably work better, but um when you really think about it, that's still not enabling the end consumer to make a choice for themselves. And
no,
so they're still at the whim of an authority to tell them what there is to do and not do.
yeah,
And that actually still is we don't have a free market. We don't have an audience enough that is educated enough to can make decisions enough for themselves, right?
necessarily.
So we actually don't have the components of what we actually need to make changes in the world. Um,
No,
just a
that's
minute.
true.
Larry, can you close that window? Sorry, just
No problem.
the
Oh, you were getting like really nice light and
I know,
changing colors, but
right? That's right.
we'll
It's gonna
get
be
that
a
out.
perfect. Thank you.
We'll cut that
Um,
out.
yeah, so that's
Yeah.
that's the kind of we still don't have it. It's just now flipped to the other paradigm,
Mm,
right?
yeah, which is another extreme, and then that's gonna piss off a lot of people too, and then you're gonna keep having like two
Yeah.
camps.
And in
So it's
reality,
not the solution either.
nothing's changed with the end consumer because they actually still are not able to make a decision. So we still don't have the ingredients that we need to really fundamentally shift the value chain and start to
Hmm.
drive good incentives for how farmers can be rewarded and how farmers can understand what the consumer
Yeah.
wants and how there's still not the ingredients there that we need to make that change.
Yeah, that's true. And so I feel like that's getting more already towards what you're currently are doing. But I'm still curious to
Yeah, yeah.
understand. Like, so you grew up as a
Oh, yeah.
little girl on this farm in this environment already, like way ahead of its time, with your
Mm.
father being this visionary, and then at some point in your life you said, "Okay, I'm going to do something with this," or what exactly happened that
Yeah,
brought you
I don't
to?
really know if I actually was that conscious of it.
No, it's just like a logic choice because you're born in
Well,
it.
my dad
Yeah.
was sort of like, "We need to make the farm make money, like, come on." And it was, in my, like, teenage girl mind, it was my job to do that, so we needed to make a business model that, made the farm make money, and so I sort of set about doing that, and we spoke a little bit about my dad's, uh, kind of ahead of his timeness, and he put me in a lot of business courses, and so I got a lot of training from a lot of people, whose names
Yeah.
you will probably know, but, um around how do you do marketing
Hmm.
and how do you actually create a funnel? How do you create an offering and how do you get people from awareness to action? And so I was 15 learning about these kind of really like I would call them cutting edge kind of thinking around how business is done and then at the same time learning kind of the mainstream model. So I was in business class in high school, and then I took business in university, and very quickly kind of outgrew the university. I found I would go back to university and kind of go, what are you guys
What am
doing?
I?
Because this is not. And so,
That's another broken system.
yeah, yeah, exactly. It was just starting to be broken when I was there, but, yeah, so that was so I then said, "Okay, well, I'm gonna just do this because obviously the farm needs to make money, so how do I build a model? How do I build a business model that actually has the that every actor, invisible or otherwise," and I call the invisible actors the land, the farmers, or, you know, they're invisible to each other. Consumers are invisible to farmers, right? So how do I have every
Mhm,
actor actually benefiting from this transaction, and in the now and the long term, and if it's big, right? So you can sometimes have it be that everyone benefits when it's small, but when it starts to become big, do they still benefit? And these are the questions
mhm.
that I asked myself inadvertently or with some divine intervention, I don't know, but at sort of 15 to 17 I was thinking this way, is like, how do I build this model? And yes, so that was sort of
So
what
young.
we. Yeah, well, I guess, like, when you're brought up in that sort of soup,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's the way that you approach it. I didn't have a
It's
name for
amazing.
it. It's now called
No.
regenerative, I guess, in the
Mhm.
version we were holistically managed back then, but anyways, and so
Yeah, what's in a name? It's all yeah.
yeah. So that was the first kind of foray. I did a few things. I started agriculture tourism, so I realized that there is an educational piece. This
Mhm.
consumer education, this bringing people back home, this bringing people
Yeah.
to right to the farm was necessary, and it was it was. I think if you even speak to people who attended, it was quite a transformation, a transformative experience for everyone involved. It was the hardest thing I had done. I was, um, slightly illegally pro producing food on the farm to eat and serving it, like, I didn't have all the kinda, like, checks in from the region, the food safety, so I kinda
Yeah.
was skirting under the radar, and I was cooking five-course meals, and I was marketing this to people and having people come to the farm and producing this experience that I don't even think I could do now just because of all the regulation, right? And
Well,
giving people the experience of milking cows and feeding horses and collecting eggs, and, there's just this, like, connection, and the way I describe it, and there was this one specific, and I might be mushing, groups together, but people would turn up, and you'd have these sort of women in their, like, white jeans and their stilettos turning up to the farm, and you can see the, like, kind of discomfort and fear in their eyes of this, like, "Who brought me to this weird thing? Like, I've heard it's something I need to do, but, like, why am I here?" kinda thing, and they're all strangers, so they didn't often turn up as a group that knew each other, and so you kinda have, like, 10 to 15 people who don't know each other, and then you're putting them in a very uncomfortable situation that they don't know about. They've paid a decent amount of money to be there, so they're kinda like, "Right, what is this?"
Mhm.
And I take them on the farm tour, and I take them through every aspect, and my concept was, like, I'm gonna take them to do chores, and then I'm gonna feed them food, and we're gonna have this, like, community experience. And I cannot describe it, the change between when they turn up and I have to give them like, rubber boots or gum boots to actually go and do the thing, to the end when no one wanted to leave. And they were all friends, and they were just kinda like deer in headlights walking out like, "I can't not know this stuff now, Melissa. Like, how do I now operate in the world where you've just, like, shone this big giant spotlight on all the things that I didn't know I didn't know?" And so that was a very rewarding. I always felt exhausted, but, like, spiritually filled up after those, because you see the light bulbs go off in these people's eyes, right? We have, like, discourse. They have the freedom to, because it's a small enough group, to, like, ask me questions and go, "But what about?" And, "But this is what someone else says." And so you really are, like, picking apart and starting to get to the real, change making, right?
Mhm.
So that
Mhm.
was really fun. Um,
Well,
did
again, way
that.
ahead of your
Yeah.
time. Like farm tours is like trending
Yeah.
now.
It is now, it's all the rage, right? And then I did, selling raw milk to people, which is also illegal. And
You don't tell anyone.
well, now I'm out of it, so what are they gonna do? Statutory
Yeah.
is it's all gone.
No, it's
Um,
fine.
but I think I felt really passionate about it. One, I love cows. I feel cows are the sort of, cheekily, I think they're the key to the future of the planet, but um, which is
Oh,
sometimes
yeah, you can
controversial,
talk
but
more about it, or I agree with it, honestly.
yeah, and so Jersey cows are wonderful, um, but also I felt really strongly that, there was not even an option for people to find this health-giving food called unpasteurized milk, and
Hmm.
there was a whole lot of research that was starting to come out around, like, highlighting that we didn't know really why it was super health-giving, but we knew that there was something about it. So whatever happens in the pasteurization process, it changes something, or homogenization. It changes
Mm.
something that the human biome goes, I don't really know what this is. And suddenly the milk that we know in the supermarket would be inflammatory, create, lactose intolerance. And we didn't really know why. And we didn't really know why then when people had raw milk, they didn't have the lactose intolerance because
Mm.
there's really no kind of like obvious reason. There's no enzyme in there. There's something about it that then makes the body be able to digest it. And so I felt really passionate that the market and the regulation was set up so that there was you couldn't actually access this. It was impossible. And so I set out to go, well, this should be available for people who want to choose this. Sure, there's a risk. Anything that's alive, there's a risk. Even vegetables, right? And so if you're eating food that's alive, you have to know that. And so I felt really
Yeah.
strongly, and I did a lot of thinking, but if someone's making the effort to come out to the farm, to bring their own bottles, to pay what I was charging, there's an active intent there. And so there's not, you don't kind of get this, oops, I accidentally ran into some raw milk in the supermarket and I didn't intend to, right? That was not ever going to happen.
No.
But it was really a passion of mine that people would that there would that this was an option, to access, like it kind of feels like a human right to be able to have access to food that's grown on the land that's health
Oh
giving,
yeah.
right? So yeah, that was that, and then, yeah, I moved to New Zealand, and I realized that there's a role for technology and data to play in this, and kinda went from a very hyper local food system to the longest supply chain in the world. And
Nice.
started to explore what are the challenges, and
Why?
why do we have, kind of the consequence of the value chain, and what does that look like in the farming area, and what does that look like on the business models. And again, New Zealand's different. You touched on it before.
Hmm.
They abolished subsidies, right? So we have very
Yeah.
different, and now we're in global trade, and how does that affect it? So it's quite a case study to go move from a hyper local system to a country that sells to, on average, 80 different countries with 80 different market requirements, different free trade agreements, all the financial consequences that go
Hmm.
around that, and then being an island in the South Pacific as well, and being the furthest away.
Yeah. That's super interesting. I just want to dive a little bit more in the
Mm,
case of New Zealand to understand better. So they
yeah.
abolished most farming subsidies in the 80s because
Yes.
I think they were producing vast amounts of sheep that would go exported to Middle East.
Yes.
And then in the Middle East, they said, "Oh, we only want to have live sheep," and then
Yes.
that was like a logistic nightmare to get living sheep to the Middle East and have like barns there and slaughter that. So
Oh, yeah.
it wasn't working, and the government said, "Okay, this is like a really bad business, so we're just gonna stop it." And it
Yeah.
actually makes sense, and that's what a lot of countries should look into because it's like even the European Union subsidies are the highest. It's like 80% of the budget of the
Oh,
European
really?
Union goes to subsidies and farming,
Wow.
and it's because they don't want to do protectionism towards all the other stuff, and they have yeah, it's a big geopolitical
It
thing. So
is.
the question that I would want to ask, or if you know about, is does New Zealand have very protectionistic laws that cheap food doesn't get into New Zealand, or a bad produced food doesn't get in?
You'd think, but
Free
we're not
trade.
the Euro you're not we're not the European Union, right? So we are dependent on trade.
Yeah.
And so, actually, a really good example is pork here in New Zealand. We have really high standards for animal welfare, and
Hmm.
we have so the pork, industry is up in arms, right? Because New Zealand's pork is some of the best in the world in
Hmm.
terms of, largely raised outside, all the kind of it's illegal to have them in any kind of crate or, situation that
Wow, that's
any other
amazing.
country would have.
Yeah,
And yet we import some of the most amount of pork in the world. And
that is
so
produced in probably in Belgium, because Belgium, where
Spain,
I'm from,
Canada, yep,
they
that's right.
have.
So we import all of that and it's cheap, right?
Mhm.
Um,
But then in Belgium, they have super low standards because it's super
that's right.
industrial.
Yep.
Some of the pi- pigs never see daylight, only when they're born and only
Oh
when
my
they go
god.
to the slaughterhouse. They just stay in like, it's like concentration camps
Oh, like, yeah, that makes me a bit sick.
style of.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that, but it's
No, I
just
know. I
what people
actually
should
know.
be aware of
They should be
in what
aware
they
of, right?
eat.
And that's, and weirdly, if I kind of I feel passionate about how do you make, like, kind of reasoned decisions beyond the sort of standards and certifications, is how do you actually you just have to know that, right? You go, "Well, this is the standard in this country, and this is the standard in this country," like, this is the legal thing. And so you can reasonably make a kinda jump to go, just if you're gonna try to be a better human and to do better to the planet and be animal welfare, like, just don't eat pork from this country,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
and that's like a trying to simplify the decision making.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, that's an example of, like, not protectionist. We end up to get free trade agreements or to get trading agreements, we end up, I guess, accepting a lot of, product in as well.
yeah.
People wanna send us stuff, and so we have lots of imported goods. We don't have really a protectionist kind of, there's really not a lot of, things that we
Wow.
protect.
But then
Dairy, maybe? Uh,
the buyer is more aware of it and says like, I'm gonna buy local, or
no.
is it? No,
So
okay.
this is
So
again
that's.
the New Zealand, I guess, consumer. It's a little because in New Zealand, as I described before, at some point, less and less people had spent time or been aware of farming. In New
Hmm.
Zealand, we are on a big farm, so there's still quite a lot of awareness around, and there's a little bit of a ignorance, arrogance. We kind of assume that the food that is produced that we're getting from the supermarket is healthy. Now that's a big generalization. You're just kind
Hmm.
of like, "Oh, but it probably comes from Steve down the," like, there's one degree of
Oh,
separation, right? And so
yeah.
um, you just don't have the same, consumer, awareness or challenge of trying to procure good food.
Hmm.
Whether it's real or perceived, there is this assumption that, oh, well, the meat from the supermarket is probably from Steve, and the milk from the supermarket is going to be from Joanna, and it's all fine. I'm all
Hmm.
good, and I'm always going to have
Yeah,
food, right? And I'm always going to have access to this,
yeah.
and so we don't really have this awareness or this need to be more conscious about what we're putting in our mouths.
Hmm.
That
Sounds
I
like a lot of countries
Yeah, it's
in the
probably like
Western
a
world.
I would say it's perceived, I don't think it's real. I think there's a lot of things I could I was actually on a plane yesterday with a woman, and we were sort of talking out of school a little bit because there's probably a whole host of, headlines that I could share about New Zealand's agriculture, which would really, if it was validated and it is, would bring down a lot of the kind of, like, trust that New Zealand enjoys at the moment around green and clean.
Hmm.
And so and they're starting to see the cracks in that,
Hmm.
because for example, in a subsidy world, you can kind of reward behavior that you think is good practice.
Hmm.
In a not subsidy world, you have to regulate it.
Hmm.
And so now there's this completely different stick versus carrot.
Hmm.
And the and so that really changes how farmers operate. And it is very much you just do whatever you get paid to do. And it's not very high, that bar. And if you're not paid to actually take care of the land, and if you're not paid to make sure your animals are nutrient dense, you're gonna
Hmm.
make sure they get the, legal starvation amount and
Hmm.
ensure that, and you're not gonna take care of your soil because 'cause you're just gonna put heaps of synthetic nitrogen on it and water it and irrigate it and then ship the most amount of volume of animals out the door because that's what you're paid to do.
Hmm.
And so it really creates this, like, highlights, that farmers will do. what they're paid to do. And so you have
Mhm.
to kind of go, what are you paying them to do? And so there's
Mhm.
a different reward mechanism if it's subsidy versus if it's sort of free market.
Yeah.
And I do think, on the other hand, though, um, we struggle in the global food chain, I guess, because we don't have subsidies, and so farmers have to make the money their own way, and all of the things have to be profitable, and so the in a way that makes food much more expensive, and or perceived to be expensive,
Mhm.
because while in the subsidy world, you're still paying for it, but it just doesn't come out of your bank account, right? It comes out of your taxes, and so you kinda don't
Mhm.
see it, you're not aware of it.
Yeah.
Um, and and so as a result of that, um, I think the way that mm, the cost of food of, say, in New Zealand is actually more of the real cost of food,
Mm.
kinda different to the rest of the world, and I don't but however, it's still a smaller fraction of a household budget than it was 10 to 20, 30 years
Mm.
ago.
Yeah.
So, there's
Okay, yeah.
lots of
That
advancements.
makes sense.
Right, so I think people
So
this
just getting rid of the subsidies doesn't really solve the issue. There has to be a more active approach in
mm,
stimulating for better quality and probably
mhm,
consumer awareness and the work you're doing around
mm,
branding. So let's talk a bit more about that. Like,
yeah,
where does your business fit in, and what
yeah.
are the problems that your clients have, and how do you solve them?
Well, um the problems that they say they have, so let's say, there's it's very complex, right? When you're in New Zealand, you have all sorts of businesses. You have the exporters, which are not really the brands, they're the processors, they're ingredients. So you sort of see in New Zealand, we have a very ingredient-focused kind of commodity approach,
Hmm.
which has a consequence, right? Which means that you are effectively in a volume business, and you are not
Yeah,
rewarding any kind of, characteristic beyond uh, red meat,
what it
white
is.
milk. Yeah, and so there's no reward mechanism. Now, some of those companies will say, well, the buyers don't want it, and the brands, the Mars, the Nestle's, don't want it, and that is an um, interesting statement, and here's why: because we have a finite supply of product. So in New Zealand, we have a big farm and we produce X amount of meat and X amount of milk and X amount of, whatever. So we are never going to be a volume play, a big, like, kind of. So we
What do
never
you have
really.
on the farm? How big is it, and what is it?
Well, I'm just thinking New Zealand is as if you think of New Zealand as a big farm.
Oh, as
So
one
like
big
the
farm. Okay, I
country as
thought
one big
you're
farm, right?
referring to your own farm, but
No, no,
yeah.
no. As one big farm, then actually there's a finite amount of products we can sell as a country.
Hmm.
So as a result, we actually we don't have an ability to grow, so we don't really have much more volume we can provide. We also don't have a need to get more sales. So we're not asking the questions, how better can I serve you, or how can I get some more business, or how can I take business off of the other guy? And this is broad brush strokes, but you will start to see in our sales teams, because we're ingredient suppliers, we don't actually ask these questions. So the information that comes back to say, what does the consumer want, is largely informed from a question that was poorly asked, which is,
Mm.
what do you want? And the buyer will say, well, I want red meat. Like, what a silly question. But because we're not actually in a competitive place and we can't actually provide even more product or in a different way, the question doesn't get asked. We struggle just to keep up with the small volumes that we can supply. And
Hmm.
so that's kind of the challenge around how do you determine what actually is the problem, is you really have to ask better questions. So
Mm.
where I'm working now is a little bit further down the sort of supply chain in the brands, the ones that have a bit more consumer facing, is you can see they're increasingly wanting to get more farm data and an understanding of their value chain. And now that may be because of this carbon reporting, that sort
Mm.
of like sustainability compliance. But what becomes more possible is that there's a whole lot more ways to grow when you see the what's actually happening on the farm. You see new product opportunities, you see differentiation opportunities, you see,
Mm.
you know, as you and I know, like there's a sort of abundance of characteristics of on
Oh, yeah.
farm, types of practices. How do you
Mhm.
create growth and differentiation
Yeah.
from that supply pool? And that's where the using data, enabling making it super easy for farmers to meet compliances, automating a lot of those assurances, and then taking that, evidence through the value chain to then say to a kiwi fruit producer, "Hey, do you know that 10% of your growers actually meet this retailer's requirement and you don't sell to them? Here's this opportunity for growth."
Oh,
And
okay. Wow.
that kind of a thing. So it's sort of taking like what I did at a small level and then just doing the same thing, but at a much bigger data informed kind of way.
Well, and that's with supermarkets, or you focus on farms that do direct marketing, or it's a blend of the
Yeah,
above,
it's a
or
blend. It's interesting because we're right kind of in the throes of that at the moment of like where's the first kind of like place that we can make this really change. We started with the regenerative verified farms,
Mhm.
and
Oh,
because they
cool.
have um, data. Actually, they've got indices and they measure data
Mhm.
and they sort of are making a difference. As now I have things that I can share and that I can actually be utilized as characteristics and differentiators and stories and kind of like ways to sell to premium brands.
Mhm. Is that related to what Patagonia is doing with the regenerative organic? Is that like a similar approach where you certify to give that access to consumers?
Yeah, so regenerative organic is another certification, and so and then what you quickly learn is the farmer is faced with this like, which one do I do?
Yeah.
Because which one has the most consumer awareness? Which one has the
Mm.
most, and one sort of like thing I see and I observe, which I don't really understand, is certifications don't do a great job of educating consumers. And
No.
so consumer doesn't actually understand what is the difference between ROC and a Savory Institute. If you ask the
Mm.
average consumer, no idea. So you have 6 different organic certifications and regenerative certifications on the shelf. That's already targeting a very niche customer. And then to try to differentiate amongst that, there is really no understanding, right? And so this is the challenge of the sort of like, I would call them ambitious brands or the ones that are doing the conscious sort of approach is you really haven't done a great job of what's in it for me. And I think it's kind of
Yeah.
weirdly exciting because I've known this for a long time, but we've never seen it play out in real life um, that there is no understanding of what these certifications mean. And so for a long time in the global food system, the certification was the kind of like analog best tool we had to communicate trust, virtue, goodness.
Yeah.
And now we're
But that
seeing
started to crumble too, because
it's
like
kind of
bio or
meaningless.
organic
Yeah.
isn't organic, and people start to know that, and so it's like, oh, what the heck? I'll just buy.
Yeah.
There's a massive decline in organic in Europe because
Is there
it's like standards were not.
upheld?
Um, yeah. Also, that the price difference is too little for farmers to keep justifying to pay all the paperwork. Like, and that's even my brother. We have a mobile hen houses like chicken tractors for
Yeah,
farm raised
amazing.
eggs on pasture land, and we decided not to do it in organic because we have or my brother has a strong brand.
Yeah,
um, it is organic, but we don't certify it because then the
that's right.
consumer would have to pay 10 cents more just for a for a
That's right.
symbol on a package,
And
which
they
doesn't
already
make
have
sense.
built so what you've done is self-certify is essentially is that kind of
Yeah,
like you've
probably.
got that brand that has that trust, but in a weird way, you've shortened that supply chain, and 2, you've, spent a lot of time, effort, and money to build up that trust and that
Oh yeah.
relationship, right? And so
Yeah,
the certification kind of and when growing up, my
it
dad
speeds
started.
it up if you can tap into it immediately. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
so
what
the
you were?
exactly. So
Yeah.
the certification, the organic, we had to like it was still a cottage industry really in Canada, and so we would have it was a cert eco I'm not sure what it was, EcoCert or something, and we would
Mhm.
sell soya beans to the European Union. Um, that was before the Canadian organic standard, and so the, um, the 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 whole certifications quite changed quite rapidly when the Canadian, government got involved and created a standard, and I observed and was I can tell you where I was standing when all of a sudden the rules were different, the interaction with the auditor was different. There was
Mhm.
no kind of conversation about continuous improvement anymore. It was like, "He is the police and we are the accused." And you can nothing good comes from that. Nothing good would come
No.
from that, right? And so then we were like, "Is this really worth it?" But in that long supply chain of European Union it wasn't Union, Europe to, Canada at the time, that was
Mhm.
the only mechanism for trust that
Yeah.
we had.
Mhm.
And there's still sort of a role to play in that, but, increasingly, I kind of, radically feel like we're into a post-certification world, and what does that look like? And increasingly, I think the world of LLM search, large language model search, and people having wearables and having this precision, understanding of their own bodies, um, is starting to change how food is purchased. And so
Mm.
I don't think certifications stack up in that, and no certification that I have seen has tried to even address that or make it relevant to kind of the consumer as we currently understand it.
Oh yeah, that's a very good point because as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like okay, you can follow a kind of centralized certification body which
Mhm,
will give some trust to the consumers, but then it's very bureaucratic and
mhm.
costs a lot of money, and then the consumer has to be like, okay, I have to justify myself that this is a more expensive product that should be somewhat better in health
Mhm.
quality, but the news also says, or there's some conspiracies that
Yep.
whatever, and some it's true, like some products in organic are even worse than chemical products, so
Exactly.
that's then
Yeah.
even more confusing. So then you go to the supermarket and you just buy the cheapest because it's all
Yeah,
confusing, and
because it
and
doesn't make
even
any sense. Yeah.
so, even so that when they go to the supermarket, there's so much different things with different labels that they get so confused that they go past the fresh and
Yep.
good stuff and just go straight to processed because it's like, oh, processed, it's always the same. And so
It's
that's
spot on.
that's also what a lot of supermarkets have
Yeah.
used as like a psychology trick. Like if you enter most
Yeah.
supermarkets, what you come in first is like the good veggies and the fruits, and
Yep.
there's a lot of it, and it's also like different types. So they want to give people a good feeling of like, oh, I'm gonna pick one tomato. Now I feel really good that I have something good, and
To
then
the
they walk
granola
on
bar
by
section.
to all the granola bar section. Yeah, that's how supermarkets are intended to
Yeah,
confuse people
agree.
to then buy processed because processed has more margins. It's easier to store. Yeah,
Yeah.
the list is long why supermarkets want to sell more
Well,
processed.
and if you're thinking about getting into a food business, you're not gonna think about getting into, like, the tomato business, are you? That's
No,
like you're gonna go, "I'm gonna make this fancy high performing energy drink because
yeah,
why higher margins, ingredients, like, hello, and it's a clearer value proposition." Whereas
yes,
you kind of like I touched on before, the global food system doesn't is not set up anymore to actually reflect what is going on, right? You have your what
mm,
do you have? Your sort of ingredients list, your nutrition panel, country of origin. That's it. And
yeah,
what you really know and what we really understand is that farming practices are so changeable and diversified across the world. So tomatoes are not tomatoes anymore, and oats are not oats anymore, and so that's starting to now become very obvious. And the reason,
hmm,
I guess, I'm involved with a professor friend of mine, and he's starting to make he's one of the first to make this link in the world between and finally done it at a proven it at a blood consumer like a human level. So he's
hmm,
made the link between soil, plant, animal, and then human. And he's
hmm,
done that for meat and milk. And if you farm it in certain ways, and he has been able to prove that if you farm in a more he doesn't call it regenerative because he's a scientist, so he says
Yeah,
if you farm in these ways,
yeah.
um,
Neutralistic or
yeah,
yeah.
like holistic nutrition and you know, they've reduced synthetic fertilizers by 50%, and he's had a hard row to hoe really because the university is like, if you don't make money from your dairy farm, you have to pay us. So basically, they've set this like major constraint to do proper science. And so they have to make money and they have to produce milk and they have to produce certain volumes and they have to do that. And so they're trying all these things and they've managed to reduce synthetic fertilizers by 50%, increase the micronutrients, increase productivity, reduce milking days. The cows are so fat and happy, like it just makes you so happy. And then on top of that, when they feed that milk and meat to humans, they have now tested at the blood level the markers for disease, and they are drastically different and drastically
Mhm.
reduced. So we can now prove what we kind of have always known. When you eat food that comes from a certain system that is healthy, when the system is healthy, then
Mm,
the human system is healthy, right? And
nice.
that's now starting to be proven, but you can see that that's a layer beneath what actually lives on the panel of a food in the supermarket, right? That is
Oh
the
yeah.
invisible part of, and
It's
that's
not
where all the good
yeah.
stuff lives, right? So how do you
Mhm.
communicate that over
Yeah.
distance? That is beyond country of origin. That is beyond nutrient panel. That is beyond ingredients list. And so how do you manage, and you kind of can't really understand it till you see how fat and happy the cows are, right? How
Yeah.
do you prove how fat and happy my cows are? And so
Well,
it's
branding and marketing comes
exactly,
in.
right? And so how do you do that, and how do you prove it, and how do you build the trust? And I think that's massively shifting, and that's kind of what I'm here to do is how do you, in this new world where information is rife, the good, the bad, the ugly, how does a brand interact with their supply chain and their consumers to build trust and be able to drive the sort of beneficial outcomes for the planet that we all say we want,
Mhm.
um, but haven't been able to really achieve because of sort of perverse business models, the global food system that actually rewards mostly the middle, not the ends. And so this is the like radical shift that I'm looking to enable and through data and technology.
Wow, that's super interesting because I think like a lot of people say like, oh, but consumers are not ready to pay more for their food, and I want to challenge that because
Mm,
you see that the healthcare business is very expensive. People are spending a lot of money on their healthcare, especially
mhm,
in countries where the government doesn't support it. But
mhm.
then the biggest growing industry in the food or health space is supplements. Like everyone
I
is
know.
eating shitty food, and then they've spent like several hundreds a month
Exactly.
on supplements. Whereas like,
And
hey,
you're like,
let's just shift that money
yeah,
into just eating the healthy milk, the healthy whatever. If you're
yeah.
vegan, healthy, um,
So
natural
you hit it right
plant
on the head.
proteins.
You absolutely
Hmm.
hit it right on the head, and so I think, you asked a better question there, right? So I think the brands and the sort of exporters really need to ask better questions and going, okay, what is the context of the consumer? What are they spending their money on? Where is the kind of solution? So there's a lot of identity that we can solve because I want to be a healthy person. So how do I provide a product that serves an identity?
Hmm.
That is a very real thing. Apple
Yeah,
company serves an
Apple did that,
identity.
and that's what these like kind of supplement companies and biohacking
Absolutely.
and all that stuff. They are really
Absolutely.
good at that, but then
Yep.
in the actual food industry, that's lacking. So I'm
And but you
very
what you
curious
also
to
pointed
see
to
that.
is that the consumer has a breakdown called "I'm not healthy" or "I want to be healthy," and they're currently serving that with, apps
Supplements.
and supplements. And so then you kind of go, "Well, there's a big market in the
Yeah.
world for that." And if you choose to, you can create a product that addresses that in a new and better novel way called
Hmm.
food, ironically.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to say that there's not a market and exactly what you said, to challenge that notion that consumers won't pay more for it, we really have, I think it's just a failing, it's just kind of like highlights a failing of marketing, failing of business, is that you just really
Yep.
haven't done a good job of making it obvious that you're the solution to the problem.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I fully agree with you because it's like, oh, it doesn't work, so we're not gonna bother trying. Well,
Yeah.
okay, then it's definitely not gonna work because
Yeah,
also on our own farm we see like we have direct consumer programs, so people can order on the website, and once a month it gets
absolutely.
delivered to their home.
Yeah,
And we collaborate with other like other like-minded crazy farmers
amazing.
that are going
So
against the
good.
stream.
Yes.
And it's not big, it's like we need like ways to scale it, but we have about like 60 boxes of, and some people order quite a lot. And interestingly, you would say like, oh, but then it's kind of like a luxury because it is more expensive. But then I remember when it was COVID, I was on the farm and I would do the tour of like the delivery
Hmm.
and bringing the
Hmm.
boxes, and you see a variety of people, like even
Absolutely.
in areas where people are living more in like social housing.
Housing.
We
Yep.
had quite a lot of
Hmm.
deliveries there. Obviously, also very expensive houses, but it wasn't like that I was only driving to villas who
I
um,
agree. That is
so
exactly
there's
you so hit on the head. That was my experience with on the farm in Canada. And so I have this juxtaposed narrative of they won't pay, but also this lived experience that people will pay and people will drive 6 hours
oh
to
yeah,
come and buy
it's
food and
weird.
they will go out of their way. And so I'm kind of like, how can those two realities be true at the same time? And which
Yeah,
one is it?
yeah,
And maybe they're both true.
they're
But I
both
do,
true, and you got to
yeah,
pick the one you believe in most to
that's
pursue.
right. And I think you have to kind of go, okay, well, what is the characteristic or what is the truth about those people that are buying that? What are they looking
Hmm.
for? And
Hmm.
if we're not looking for if we're not starting to dig further into that and go, oh, that it maybe warrants more investigation,
Yep,
then we're really not doing the planet a service, ourselves a service, our business a service, right? And so,
yep.
but I don't know why people are not more curious about what drives the social housing person to buy meat directly from a farm and care
At a
about that.
premium
Like,
price.
why are
Yeah.
we not asking that question? Don't ask the premium consumers. Like, you kind of go, sure, surplus. Obviously, they have the ability, education, and means to do that. But
Yeah,
why is this person doing that? Right. And so,
yeah.
to me, it really is the world, and that your results are a function of the questions you ask.
And you have found some answers on that? Because I think I have a feeling that it's also this, and you probably talk a lot about that. We can now include like
Mm.
Marsha and Marsha's work, and
Mm.
she's like the greatest marketing sales. She's like a
Yeah, she's
powerhouse,
amazing.
and she connected both of us.
Yeah.
But it's like about like sell them what they want, like figure
Yes.
out what they want and sell that. Like I see a lot of farmers or farm to table, they try and make it like look nice and boutique style, and that's all good, you should keep doing that, but what
Mm.
why do people actually buy it? So
Yes.
and can we put like, maybe it's like they found on TikTok that if you eat red meat, it's or raw milk, it's good for breastfeeding. Whatever, I'm making stuff up.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah.
put on your package like this is breastfeeding
Just put
quality
it
milk
there.
or
Yes.
something, and farmers don't dare to do it oftentimes.
No.
Are you with that, or to make
Yeah, well,
like bold statements about their
that's
product?
yeah, so in a small domestic supply chain, you can be a lot more rogue, as I've learned. And you can say kind of whatever you want, and there's not really a lot of consequences that will come to you, especially if you're in a farmer's market. You can, so if I had my time over again, I would go out the gate and make claims and, because there's not really a legislative stick that can come and say that, right?
Uh-huh.
And I learned that the hard way when a whole bunch of other organic people started to copy me, and they would just say they're organic, and I was like, "Well, that's rubbish, you're not." And then they were like, "Well, what's anyone gonna do about it?" And I so as a small farmer in a domestic supply chain, absolutely, make claims that are consumer oriented, say whatever you can about what problem you solve for a consumer.
Hmm. Hmm.
In the long global supply chain, there is a lot more regulation, and to the point where, the FDA will not let you put a different nutrient panel on your meat product. So, you cannot if you can prove that your meat is regenerative and has more nutrition, you can't change your nutrient panel. You have to put the meat nutrient panel on it.
Hmm.
And so that's really prohibitive around what you can say and so that's why I feel really passionate about data, evidence, proof, because that's the protection against making false claims, right? And so we need the people to push the boundary. We need the brands to be bold. We need people to go out and kind of like say these things, um, even if it's just in their marketing because
Mhm.
otherwise we will never get the movement towards better, right? And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that's what I observe in the global supply chain, having come from small local, is that
Mhm.
the whole thing is optimized for like just past the post, right?
Oh,
Just
yeah. It's
meet the
all
meet the
meat.
need, and
Mhm.
you can't, and so the consumer cannot see inside of that vast sea of food options who the good guys are. And
Mm.
even when you look at New Zealand's meat and milk, and you put 5,000 farmers into a vat or into a crate, and there's good guys in there and not so good guys in there, but you cannot differentiate, right? And so the whole global food system is just set up to not see the good guys and not allow consumers to see the good guys. And so that's kind of where I feel very passionate. A system that doesn't have the ability to see good actors is not going to be a good system for very long.
Mhm. Yeah, so it sounds like that with your business, you're also made the decision to go and, let's say, play with the big guys and step into the
Bigger,
global bigger
different,
guys.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I think
even
it's,
if and it's a yeah, it's a must. It has to be because some people are saying like supermarkets are evil and none, but that's like it's not about the supermarkets. It's the way they are using it. So we have to also change. Like a supermarket is a good system. Like
mm,
it's
yes.
a something that works. You go, it's convenience. Like we all
You
want convenience and hyper convenience now, like
mm,
pre-made food and all that.
yes.
So um, you have to, if you really want to get like regenerative on a big scale, we have to tap into those
Well, there's
networks
a
too.
there's a few things, and I learned this actually in my trip to London. There's supermarkets and there's supermarkets, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm working with the so for example, I'll just go back a step. So the processors are actually not incentivized to differentiate and make, like kind of go niche products, right? Because what that means is all their volumes and all their kind of like margins will be eroded,
Hmm.
because it's not in their best interest that 2 farms have really high quality meat and then 20 farms don't. And so then what that means is then the everyone will be like, "Well, why don't you give me the good stuff?" Right? And so there's sort of like, "Wait, I need to make this all look the same." So that perceived or real, I have questions about that. But then you go
Yeah.
to, the retailers, and retailers, there's different models. Some retailers are, I'll take brands and put them on my shelves and be the showcase of brands, and then there's other retailers who are like, "I'll have my own brands." And they consider those ones that have their own brands, it is not their best interest that there is unique and differentiated products, because if the consumer has more loyalty to a brand than they do to the retail brand, then the power of the retailer's business is gone. And
Mm.
so if the consumer's coming in for a special blue cheese brand that is the best in the world, and it's not on the shelf, they'll go. And the
Mm.
retailer knows this, and so they really need the
Wow.
consumer to be the solution of like, "I'm everything to you. I have all the things you need, and you're gonna come to me, you're gonna walk in my door because when you come to me, I have everything you need." If that is different and they're relying on artisans, small volumes, specialty products that the consumer starts to love and they're not on the shelf, then the rest of the retail's model goes away.
Uh-huh.
So they
So
they
some
know this.
retailers are probably going, no, we're gonna go
Yeah,
away from that model
yeah.
and we're just gonna keep focusing on things that we can produce or we can
Yeah,
um,
source in large volumes
control.
that are all the same.
Yeah, and then there's probably some
Mm.
supermarkets, and I'm guessing you're working with those that say like, no, we want to be known for we have that cheese that you
Yes,
can't
that's
find
right.
anywhere else. So
That's
these
right,
are
and
the
then so then
players to work with.
they are the model of relying on other brands' power. So then they're in the business of stocking the coolest, sexiest foods that ever was, right? And
Yeah.
that kind of model is like, oh, well, those incentives are actually organized in the right way, right? So you go,
Uh-huh.
okay, well, let's work with those guys because they want to celebrate and lean on the brand power of
Hmm.
other brands.
Yeah.
And
Uh,
that's probably more the American model. I do see the sort of like, when I see and you can see in a like in the UK, it's a very hyper saturated market, and so it's cannibalistic behavior. It is, there is. not a lot of room for wiggle, right? And so their margins are super thin and they're working on like they need the consumer to come in and buy lots of things at that one shop, right? And so that's the kind of you can see how it starts to change all the behavior of what people what consumers how consumers behave and how retailers behave and what types of things they reward in the value chain.
Mhm.
So mm.
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. So I think you'll be becoming a also like a supermarket designer and
there's
rebranding the whole
There's
supermarket.
there's yeah, there's change coming, and yeah, if people are if we start to get into this LLM world and precision kind of recommendations for me on Tuesday with my health and my dietary requirements,
Mhm.
supermarkets don't really have a place in that, and they're not really looking at how they have a place in that. So, um,
Oh yeah. So that's what's gonna happen. We're gonna be
yeah,
like super tuned into because that's another super fast growing industry
hmm
is the health monitoring with what is it,
oh,
aura
absolutely,
rings and blood
absolutely,
tests
yeah,
and
the
whatever
wearables, right? Yeah,
wearables. So that data is going to be used to tell you, okay, here's your shopping list of the week. This is what
that's right.
like, and every week it's going to be different.
So
So
that
that
that is
then it will
possible right
become very
now,
interesting.
but what's missing is that you need a translator. You need a farmer's daughter to translate what is healthy to how does that meet your I didn't sleep very well last night and here's all the other things I know about me, right? So
Yeah.
that's where data and AI and ontologies can come in, but that's a big job. So that's why we're
Hmm.
developing the health farming ontology, which then helps people translate um, agriculture data into
Hmm.
human health data, right? And
Hmm.
that matching is actually the thing that's needed to
Oh.
um, make the difference. But that's a big gap at the moment, and the reason why you don't have your kind of whoops and aura rings making recommendations because they're completely different data sets, and to do that at scale is like you have to get
Hmm.
the academic papers and half of them don't agree, and so how do you build these ontological frameworks that actually make that translation possible?
Nice. And so is that what you're focusing on the most with your clients is, or are you working
Yeah,
with
well,
the
actually, we're
actual
building that in the
producers?
back end. We're building that in the back end because we don't no one kind of knows that that's what's missing yet. But there is this articulated function of I need to um, reach more consumers. How do I do that?
Mhm.
And so we're building the kind of data engine and the platform to make that possible on a scale and through technology.
Nice. Wow, I love that. I think we could keep talking for hours
Yeah, I
about
could.
this topic, and we like haven't even talked about rugby and all those things. So that that'll be for
That's
another
right.
time.
Another time.
Um,
Uh,
but I wanna start wrapping it up. So and I wanna end with asking you two questions. Like one is like what is the best piece of advice you can give to farmers who are
mm,
ready to do more direct
mm,
consumerism, or however you call that? That's my
yeah.
first question. And my second is like, if you want to do a shout out to people that might be listening and how they can connect with you,
Mm.
or what you're actually looking for in your in like collaborations or people, then
Yeah, yeah, great.
we can use that too.
So for farmers ready to make that leap,
Hmm.
a couple of things. Uh,
Or already in the process of and maybe
yeah, already in the
struggling with volume.
volume. So you're always going to struggle with volume. So if you're one farm, that's the have I would implore people and wish I did have a think about how you grow and beyond your own sort of farm. And is that more products? Is that more farms supplying? And then once you do that, you now have the challenge of is my farm's product the same as the next farm's product? And what I learned is that it doesn't have to be the same, but make it visible how they are the same and different. And what I ended up with in Canada was that I kind of had lots of different customers and I had just 5 different farms and they all had different growing practices and I kind of became this matching function. And so I kind of lean into the diversity and go like, well, these guys finish on oats. These guys are fully grass fed. The meat profile is different. That and I would just match them with the different people, the chefs, the health requirements, and that was my kind of function. I was a one-woman spreadsheet algorithm kind of thing. Um, so I kind of go, don't fight against the diversity of these different growing situations. Lean
Hmm.
into it because that's the beauty, right? For every growing system, there is actually a consumer, and it's magical when you really start to allow that to be possible. Just need to
Hmm.
make it visible. What it also does is actually brings awareness to the consumer as to how different these different types of systems are, which I think is needed just
Hmm.
as a general statement. And then where am I at? I am looking for brands that are interested in growing. Brands that want to reach the consumer more effectively, and brands that want to differentiate using their supply chain.
Yeah.
So people who are in new product development, people who are in kind of that marketing area, um, or and often we hear marketing kind of struggles to get information from supply chain because they're like two different departments in an organization. So
Hmm.
we bridge those gaps to make it more coherent, so that you can start to address more consumer needs more effectively using your value chain.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'm keen to find who are the brands in the world really looking to do this with data, really looking to validate, really looking to push and go beyond certifications, right? Because they're expensive even for brands, and they're
Hmm.
expensive for farmers, and they're confusing for consumers. So how do you really cut through the noise and make a statement, and in doing so make the planet better? So
Wow. Yeah, that's very cool. And I think you should have a conversation with my sister because our farm
mm,
has grown and we she stepped in the business a few years ago and she's doing the marketing and sales
mm.
and
Oh, I'd
events
love to.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
actually all the things that you talked about that you did
You have
on
to.
your
It's the
life,
mix. Yeah.
we're doing on our farm and we have
Amazing.
gardens and
Well,
yeah.
I'll make you a deal. I'll come visit you, and we'll just have a
Oh
chat.
yeah, perfect. That's great. Yeah, we can
That is
definitely
cool.
arrange that when
Mhm.
are you often in the UK or
No, I usually am sort of stateside America, and, yeah, it's interesting. European Union with more subsidies, America with more free market, kind of more, just totally different types of, approaches, and not
Mhm.
one not better, but you see the difference around the nuances of how that does or doesn't change behavior of both consumers and farmers.
Mhm.
So,
No, I agree, and I think it's a good lesson to see, like, okay, if you remove the subsidies, that's not gonna solve the solution or solve the issues. It's like because
yeah,
everyone you could start blaming it's the European Union or it's the government or it's the regulations that are too strict or this or that. But actually, it's about every farmer taking his own responsibility
yeah,
or every even business owner.
yep,
Because if there's people that want to get in the food industry, I think there's a lot of opportunities. Just like my sister decided to join the farm, I think a lot of farmers need that support to be
absolutely.
able to get the right price for their product,
I think there's,
given if they're doing it in a way
yeah.
that the consumer wants. Yeah.
Well, I sort of served as the marketing function for a lot of farmers, right? And I think that would be like sounds like that's what your sister's doing too, right? Like
Yeah.
how do you because as soon as you're a farm and you want to sell to the consumer, you're now whether you know it or not, you're
Different
getting
business.
into a whole lot of different business,
Oh
right?
yeah.
You're now
Yeah.
into a
Yeah.
different business. So it is how do you structure that in a way that you can do that with the margins, and I think that's where I got really excited because I was like, "Okay, to grow and to make more of an impact, I need volume, I need to do this, but I can't kinda do this." There's a lot of constraints, and so I start to get a bit more of, like, a curiosity around how do I do that at scale? Um, I guess if I were to flash forward just to end it off, I kind of envision in the future you know how you have the toothpaste aisle? You know, in toothpaste, you got, like, every which way you can clean your teeth, right? And so we came
Uh-huh.
from baking soda to, the toothpaste aisle, which is massive, and all the
Oh
different
yeah.
price points and all the different packaging and all the different charcoal or, fluoride or not or blah, 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 and and that's kind of how I imagine the egg aisle is going that way a bit as well, right? You have all the different
Hmm.
ways of and that's kind of how I imagine food is that with more visibility of growing practices and that kind of thing, that we will have different price points and slightly different, like cents different, but you just pay for what you can and you endeavor to move up to a higher healthy, farming practice, right? Like that is,
Mhm.
it's free, it's open, there's no shame in it. It's,
No.
it's just making visible what the different price points are
Yeah,
and what
exactly.
different growing systems are, and then you assign a price, and if the market pays, then there's demand, right? There's sort of this really kind of magical thing that can happen, but without visibility and optionality and choice, then it's not actually a market.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So, mm.
That's true. It's interesting. I see a lot of like ideas of how to brand it. Like you could have eggs in the egg rayon which says "Don't buy the other eggs," and that's like the premium egg because the other
That's
ones are
right.
making you sick.
That's
So that
right, yeah.
would work.
Yeah, well,
The
we should
"Don't buy
actually
the
get
other eggs" brand.
You know what?
The
You're
old,
right. We should bring Marsha into the farm, and we should have her magical brain. Um, bring her to Portugal, and she'll and bring me. We'll together. We'll completely transform the farm,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
exactly,
messaging and the yeah. Anyways,
totally.
thank you
Yeah.
so much.
No, thank you very much, Melissa, for coming on the show. It was a joy. We'll continue this
Yeah.
some other time. And
Yes.
thanks again.
Thank you too. I loved it. Talk soon.